Reinhold Messner is a mountaineer, adventurer, explorer, and author from the Italian autonomous province of South Tyrol, whose astonishing feats on Everest and on peaks throughout the world have earned him the status of the greatest climber in history. He is renowned for making the first solo ascent of Mount Everest without supplemental oxygen and for being the first climber to ascend all 14,800 meters above sea level. He is the author of at least 63 books, many of which have been translated into other languages. Biography: born in Brixen, Italy, Messner is a native speaker of German and Italian, and also fluent in English. He grew up in Vilna, Paragraph, and spent his early years climbing in the Alps and fell in love with the Dolomites. His father, Joseph Messner, was a teacher. He was also very strict and sometimes severe with Reinhold. Joseph led Reinhold to his first summit at the age of 5. Reinhold had 8 brothers and 1 sister. He later climbed with his brother Gar 1/4 Nther and made Arctic crossings with his brother Hubert. When Reinhold was 13, he began climbing with his brother Gar 1/4 Nther, age 11. By the time Reinhold and Gar 1/4 Nther were in their early 20s, they were among Europe's best climbers. Since the 1960s, Messner, inspired by Hermann Buhl, was one of the first and most enthusiastic supporters of alpine-style mountaineering in the Himalayas, which consisted of climbing with very light equipment and a minimum of external help. Messner considered the usual expedition style disrespectful toward nature and mountains. Messner's first major Himalayan climb in 1970, the unclimbed Rupal face of Nanga Parbat, turned out to be a tragic success. Both he and his brother Gar 1/4 Nther reached the summit, but Gar 1/4 Nther died 2 days later on the descent of the Diamir face. Reinhold lost 6 toes, which had become badly frostbitten during the climb and required amputation. Reinhold was severely criticized for persisting on this climb with less experienced Gar 1/4 Nther. The 2010 movie Nanga Parbat by Joseph Vilsmeyer is based on his account of the events. While Messner and Peter Habeler were noted for fast ascents in the Alps of the Eiger North Wall, Standard Route and Les Droites, his 1975 Gasherbrum first ascent of a new route took 3 days. This was unheard of at the time. In the 1970s, Messner championed the cause for ascending Mount Everest without supplementary oxygen, saying that he would do it by fair means, or not at all. In 1978, he reached a summit of Everest with Habeler. This was the first time anyone had been that high without bottled oxygen, and Messner and Habeler proved what certain doctors, specialists, and mountaineers thought impossible. He repeated the feat, without Habeler, from the Tibetan side in 1980, during the monsoon season. This was Everest's first solo summit. In 1978, he made a solo ascent of the Diamir face of Nanga Parbat. In 1986, Messner became the first to complete all 14,800 meters. Messner has crossed Antarctica on skis, together with fellow explorer Art Fuchs. He has written over 60 books about his experiences, a quarter of which have been translated. He was featured in the 1984 film The Dark Glow of the Mountains by Werner Herzog. Messner today carries on a diversified business related to his mountaineering skills. From 1999 to 2004, he held political office as a member of the European Parliament for the Italian Green Party. He was also among the founders of Mountain Wilderness, an international NGO dedicated to the protection of mountains worldwide. In 2004 he completed a 2,000-kilometer expedition through the Gobi Desert. He now mainly devotes himself to the Messner Mountain Museum, of which he is the founder. Expeditions. To 1970, up to 1970 Reinhold Messner had made a name for himself mainly through his achievements in the Alps. Between 1950 and 1964, he led over 500 ascents, most of them in the Dolomites. In 1965, he climbed a new direct Sima route on the north face of the Orta. A year later, he climbed the Walker Spurs on the Grands Jorasses and conquered the Roqueta Alta di Bosconro. In 1967 he made the first ascent of the northeast face of the Agna Copywriter and the first winter ascents of the Agna Copywriter north face and Fascetta north face. In 1968 he achieved further firsts, the Heerlijkreed Schoffel middle pillar and the direct south face of the Marmolada. In the following year, Messner joined in Andes expedition, during which he succeeded, together with Peter Haberler, in making the first ascent of the Yaraporja east face up to the summit ridge and, a few days later, the first ascent of the 6,121-meter-high Yaraporja Chico. He also made the first solo ascent of the Droites north face, the Philip intersection on the Civetta and the south face of Marmolata di Rocca. As a result of his achievements, Messner won the reputation of being one of the best climbers in Europe. So, in 1970, he was invited to join a major Himalayan expedition. In the light of his later successes, the year 1970 can be regarded as one of the turning points in Messner's life. Climbs of the 8,000ers. After 1970, Reinhold Messner was the first man to climb all 14 8,000ers in the world and without supplemental oxygen. His climbs were also all amongst the first 20 ascents for each mountain individually. Specifically, these are, Nanga Parbat. Reinhold Messner took a total of 5 expeditions to Nanga Parbat. In 1970 and 1978 he reached the summit. In 1971, 1973 and 1977, he did not. In 1971 he was primarily looking for his brother's remains. Rupel Face 1970. In May and June 1970, Reinhold Messner took part in the Nanga Parbat South Face expedition led by Karl Herrlichhofer, the objective of which was to climb the as yet unclimbed Rupel Face, the highest rock face in the world. Messner's brother, Garwan Nther, was also a member of the team. On the morning of June 27, Messner was of the view that the weather would deteriorate rapidly, and set off alone from the last high-altitude camp. Surprisingly, his brother climbed after him and caught up to him before the summit. By late afternoon, both had reached the summit of the mountain and had to pitch an emergency bivouac shelter without tent, sleeping bags and stoves because darkness was closing in. The events that followed have been the subject of years of legal actions and disputes between former expedition members, and have still not been finally resolved. What is known now is that Reinhold and Garwan Nther Messner descended the Diamir face, thereby achieving the first crossing of Nanga Parbat. Reinhold arrived in the valley 6 days later with severe frostbite, but survived. His brother, Garwan Nther, however died on the Diamir for sheer according to Reinhold Messner on the same descent, during which they became further and further separated from each other. As a result, the time, place and exact cause of death is unknown. Messner claimed his brother had been swept away by an avalanche. In the early years immediately after the expedition, there were disputes and lawsuits between Messner and the expedition leader, Karl Maria Herrlichhofer. After a quarter-century of peace, the dispute flared up again in October 2001, when Messner raised surprising allegations against the other members of the team for failing to come to their aid. The rest of the team consistently maintained that Reinhold Messner had told them of his idea for crossing the mountain before setting off for the summit. Messner himself asserts, however, that he made a spontaneous decision to descend the Diamir face together with his brother for reasons of safety. A number of new books by Max von Kienlin, Hans Seiler, Rolf Peter Mark-Rtin, and Reinhold Messner stoked the dispute and led to further court proceedings. In June 2005, after an unusual heatwave on the mountain, the body of his brother was recovered on the Diamir face, which seems to support Messner's account of how Garwan Nther died. The drama was turned into a film Nanga Parbat by Joseph Vilsmeyer, based on the memories of Reinhold Messner and without participation from the other former members of the expedition. Released in January 2010 in cinemas, the film was criticized by the other members of the team for telling only one side of the story. Because of severe frostbite, especially on his feet, 6 toes were amputated. Messner was not able to climb quite as well on rock after the 1970 expedition. He therefore turned his attention to higher mountains, where there was much more ice. Solo climb in 1978, after 3 unsuccessful expeditions, Reinhold Messner reached the summit of Nanga Parbat again via the Diamir face on August 9, 1978. Munailu, In 1972, Messner succeeded in climbing Manilu on what was then the totally unknown south face of the mountain, of which there were not even any pictures. From the last high-altitude camp he climbed with Frank Jarkaransieger, who turned back before reaching the summit. Shortly after Messner reached the summit, the weather changed and heavy fog and snow descended. Initially Messner became lost on the way down, but later found his way back to the camp, where Horst Fankhauser and Andy Schlick were waiting for him in Jarkaransieger. Jarkaransieger did not return, although his cries were heard from the camp. Orientation had become too difficult. Fankhauser and Schlick began to search for him that evening, but lost their way and sought shelter at first in a snow cave. Messner himself was no longer in a position to help the search. The following day, only Horst Fankhauser returned. Andy Schlick had left the snow cave during the night and become lost. So the expedition had to mourn the loss of 2 climbers. Messner was later criticized for having let Franz Jarkaransieger go back down the mountain alone. Gasherbrum. The ascent of Gasherbrum saw for the first time a mountaineering expedition succeeding in conquering an 8,000 using alpine-style climbing. Until that point, all 14 8,000-meter peaks had been summited using the expedition style, though Hermann Buhl had earlier advocated West Alpine style. Together with Peter Habeler, Messner succeeded in making the second ascent of Gasherbrum on August 10, 1975, becoming the first man ever to climb 3 8,000ers. Messner reached the summit again in 1984, this time together with Hans Kammerlander. This was achieved as part of a double ascent where, for the first time, 2 8,000er peaks were climbed without returning to base camp. Again, this was done in alpine style, that is without the pre-location of stores. Mount Everest. On May 8, 1978, Reinhold Messner stood with Peter Habeler on the summit of Mount Everest. The first men ever to climb Everest without the use of supplemental oxygen. Prior to this ascent it was disputed whether this was possible at all. Messner and Habeler were members of an expedition led by Wolfgang Nertz along the southeast ridge to the summit. Also on this expedition was Reinhard Karl, the first German to reach the summit. 2 years later, on August 20, 1980, Messner again stood atop the highest mountain in the world. This time too, the ascent was made without supplementary oxygen. For this solo climb, he chose the northeast ridge to the summit, where he crossed above the North Col and the north face to the Norton Couloir and became the first man to climb through this steep gorge to the summit. Messner decided spontaneously during the ascent to use this route to bypass the exposed northeast ridge. Prior to this solo ascent, he had not set up a camp on the mountain. K2. For 1979, Messner was planning to climb K2 on a new direct route through the south face, which he called the Magic Line. Headed by Messner, the small expedition consisted of 6 climbers, Italians Alessandro Gonna, Friedel Muchlechner and Renato Casarotto. The Austrian, Robert Schauer. And Germans Michel Dacher, journalist, Jochen Haar paragraph LZGEN, and Dr. Ursula Greta, who was injured during the approach and had to be carried to a school by Messner and Muchlechner. Because of avalanche danger on the original route and time lost on the approach, they decided on climbing via the Abruzzi Spurs. The route was equipped with fixed ropes and high-altitude camps, but no hauling equipment or bottled oxygen was used. On July 12, Messner and Dacher reached the summit. Then the weather deteriorated and attempts by other members of the party failed. Shisha Pangma, during his stay in Tibet as part of his Everest solo attempt, Messner had the opportunity to explore Shisha Pangma. A year later, Messner, with Friedel Muchlechner, Oswald Oltz and Gerd Bau, set base camp on the north side of the only 8,000er which is entirely within Chinese territory. On May 28, Messner and Muchlechner reached the summit in very bad weather. Part of the climb involving ski mountaineering. Kanchenjunga. In 1982, Messner wanted to become the first climber ever to scale 3 8,000ers in 1 year. He was planning on climbing Kanchenjunga first, before tackling Gasherbrum and the Broad Peak. Messner had chosen a new variation of the route up the north face. Because there was still a lot of snow at the time of the expedition, Messner and Mouchlechner made very slow progress. In addition, the sheer difficulty of the climb forced the two mountaineers to use fixed ropes. Finally, on May 6, Messner, Mouchlechner and Angdorji stood on the summit. There, Mouchlechner suffered frostbite to his hands, and later to his feet as well. Whilst bivouacking during the descent, the tent tore away from Mouchlechner and Messner also fell ill. He was suffering from an amoebic abscess in the liver, making him very weak. In the end he only made it back to base camp with Mouchlechner's help. Gashibrum II, after his ascent of Kanchenjunga, Mouchlechner flew back to Europe because his frostbite had to be treated and Messner needed rest. Thus the three mountains could not be climbed as planned. Messner was cured of his amoebic abscess in the liver and then travelled to Gashibrum II, but could not use the new routes as planned. In any case, his climbing partners, Shakan and Nazir Saber, would not have been strong enough. Nevertheless, all three reached a summit on July 24 in a storm. During the ascent, Messner discovered the body of a previously missing Austrian mountaineer, whom he buried 2 years later at the G2 crossing. Broad Peak. Broad Peak was the third 8,000er scaled by Messner in 1982. At the time, he was the person with a permit to climb this mountain, but he came across Jerzy Kukuczka and Wojciech Kurtyka, who had permits to climb K2, but used its geographic proximity to climb Broad Peak illegally. In early descriptions of the ascent, Messner omitted to mention this encounter, but he referred to it several years later. On August 2, Messner was reunited with Nazir Saber and Khan again on the summit. The three mountaineers had decamped and made for Broad Peak immediately after their ascent of Gashibrum II. The climb was carried out with a variation from the normal route at the start. Cho'oya. In the winter of 1982-1983, Messner attempted the first winter ascent of Cho'oya. He reached an altitude of about 7,500 meters, when great masses of snow forced him to turn back. This expedition was his first with Hans Kamelander. A few months later, on May 5, he reached a summit via a partially new route together with Kamelander and Mitchell Dacher. Annapurna. In 1985, Messner topped out on Annapurna. Using a new route on the northwest face, he reached a summit with Kamelander on April 24. Also on the expedition were Reinhard Patskada, Reinhard Schustel and Swami Prem Darshano, who did not reach the top. Even during Messner and Kamelander's ascent the weather was not good and they had to be assisted by the other three during the descent due to heavy snowfall. Dhaulagiri. Messner had already attempted Dhaulagiri in 1977 and 1984, but failed. In 1985 he finally summited. He climbed with Kamelander up the normal route along the northeast ridge. After only 3 days of climbing they stood on the top in a heavy storm on 15 May. Makalu. Messner tried 4 times to climb Makalu. He failed in 1974 and 1981 on the south face of the southeast ridge. In winter 1985-1986 he attempted the first winter ascent of Makalu via the normal route. Even this venture did not succeed. Not until February 2009 was Makalu successfully climbed in winter by Denis Yorobko and Simone Moro. In 1986, Messner returned and succeeded in reaching the top using the normal route with Kamelander and Mouchlechner. Although they had turned back twice during this expedition, they made the summit on the third attempt on September 26. During this expedition, Messner witnessed the death of Marcel Ra-1/4 for whom the Makalu was his ninth 8,000er. Ra-1/4 was on the way back from the summit and was seen by Messner and the other climbers on the descent. Although he was making slow progress, he appeared to be safe. The tea for his reception had already boiled when Ra-1/4 disappeared behind a snow ridge and did not reappear. He was found dead a short time later. Lutz. Messner climbed his last 8,000er, Lutz, on October 17, 1986 together with Hans Kamelander, using the normal route. Both climbers had to contend with a strong wind in the summit area. To reach the summit that year and before winter broke, they took a direct helicopter flight from the Makalu base camp to the Lutz base camp. thus Messner became the first person to climb all 8,000 ers. Since this ascent, Messner has never climbed another 8,000 er. In 1989, Messner led a European expedition to the south face of the mountain. The aim of the expedition was to forge a path up the as yet unclimbed face. Messner himself did not want to climb anymore. The expedition was unsuccessful. Other expeditions after 1970. 1971 AA Euro journeys to the mountains of Persia, Nepal, New Guinea, Pakistan and East Africa. 1972 AA Euro No Shack in the Hindu Kush. 1973 AA Euro Marmalada West Pillar, first climb. Fasheta West Face, first climb. 1974 AA Euro Aconcagua South Wall, partially new South Tyrol route. Eiger North Face with Peter Harbler in 10 hours. 1976 AA Euro Mount McKinley, Face of the Midnight Sun, first climb. 1978 AA Euro Kilimanjaro, Breach Wall, first climb. 1979 AA Euro Armored Album Rescue Attempt. First climbs in the Hogar Mountains, Africa. 1981 AA Euro Chamlang Center Summit North Face, first climb. 1985 AA Euro Tibet Transversal with Kailash Exploration. 1986 AA Euro Crossing of East Tibet. Mount Vinson, on December 3, 1986, thus becoming the first person to complete 7 summits without the use of supplemental oxygen on Mount Everest. 1987 AA Euro Bhutan Trip. Famia Trip. 1988 AA Euro Yeti Tibet Solo Expedition. 1989 A Euro 1990 AA Euro Antarctic Crossing on Foot, 2,800 km trek without Fuchs. 1991 AA Euro Bhutan Crossing. Around South Tyrol as a positioning exercise. 1992 AA Euro Ascent of Chimborazo. Crossing of Taklamakan Desert in Xinjiang, 1993 AA Euro trip to Dolpo, Mustang and Manang in Nepal. Greenland longitudinal crossing on foot, 2,200 km trek. 1994 AA Euro cleaning project in North India Gangotri, Shivling region. Tiruvanziri, Uganda. 1995 AA Euro Arctic crossing failed. Trip to Belukha, Altai Mountain Siberia. 1996 AA Euro trip through East Tibet and to Kailash, 1997 AA Euro trip to Kham. Small expedition into Karakoram. Filming on the Old Oino Lengai in Tanzania, 1998 AA Euro trip to the Altai Mountains and to Puna de Atacama, 1999 AA Euro filming, San Francisco Peaks, Arizona. Trip into the far desert India, 2000 AA Euro crossing of South Georgia on the Shackleton route. Nanga Parbat expedition. Filming on Mount Fuji Japan for the ZDF Series 1 Engine Der Gar Paragraph TTER, 2001 AA Euro Dharamsala and foothills of the Himalayas India. ZDF Series 1 Engine Der Gar Paragraph TTER on Gunung Agung Bali, 2002 AA Euro in the International Year of the Mountains visit by mountaineers into the Andes and descent of Cotopaxi, Ecuador, 2003 AA Euro trekking to Mount Everest. Trip to Franz Josef Land Arctic. On October 1 opening of the Gar 1/4 NTHER Mountain School in the Diamir Valley on Nanga Parbat Pakistan, 2004 AA Euro longitudinal crossing of the Gobi Desert on foot, about 2,000 km trek, 2005 AA Euro trip to the Diva Nomads in Mongolia. Time journey around Nanga Parbat Pakistan, the 7 summits. In 1985 Richard Buss first postulated and achieved the Mountaineering Challenge 7 summits, climbing the highest peaks of each of the 7 continents. Messner suggested another list replacing Mount Kosciuszko with Indonesia's Puncak Jaya, or Carson's Pyramid. From a mountaineering point of view the Messner list is the more challenging one. Climbing Carson's Pyramid has the character of an expedition, whereas the ascent of Kosciuszko is an easy hike. In May 1986 Pat Morra became the first person to complete the Messner list, followed by Messner himself when he summited Mount Vinson in December 1986 to become the second. The Messner Mountain Museum. In 2003, Messner started work on a project for a mountaineering museum. On June 11, 2006, the Messner Mountain Museum opened, a museum that unites within one museum the stories of the growth and decline of mountains, culture in the Himalayan region and the history of South Tyrol. The MMM consists of 5 locations. MMM Fermion at Sigmundsgren Castle near Bozen is the centerpiece of the museum and concentrates on Marni Euro unregistered trademark's relationship with the mountains. Surrounded by peaks from the Shiran and the Texel Range, the MMM Fermion provides visitors with a series of pathways, stairways, and towers with displays that focus on the geology of the mountains, the religious significance of mountains in the lives of people, and the history of mountaineering and alpine tourism. MMM Juvel at Juvel Castle in the Berggrafenämten Vinchgay is dedicated to the magic of the mountains, with an emphasis on mystical mountains, such as Mount Kailash or Ayers Rock, and their religious significance. MMM Juvel houses several art collections. MMM Dolomites, known as the Museum in the Clouds, is located at Monte right between Piv di Cador and Cortina d'Ampezzo. Housed in an old fort, this museum is dedicated to the subject of rocks, particularly in the Dolomites, with exhibits focusing on the history of the formation of the Dolomites. The summit observation platform offers a 360-degree panorama of the surrounding Dolomites, with views toward Monte Shira, Monte Agnar, Monte Civetta, Marmolita, Monte Pelmo, Tofana di Roses, Sorapis, Ontlay, Marmarole. MMM Ortals at Sulden on the Ortler is dedicated to the theme of ice. This underground structure is situated at 1900 meters and focuses on the history of mountaineering on ice and the great glaciers of the world. The museum contains the world's largest collection of paintings of the Ortler, as well as ice climbing gear from 2 centuries. MMM Reaper at Bruneck Castle in South Tyrol is dedicated to the mountain peoples from Asia, Africa, South America and Europe, with emphasis on their cultures, religions, and tourism activities. Politics. Messner was elected an MEP for the Italian Green Party in 1999, serving until 2004. In media, Gashibrum, Der Leuchtenberg, a 1985 Werner Herzog TV documentary, also known as The Dark Glow of the Mountains. Nanga Parbat, a 2010 film based on Messner's achievements. The unauthorized biography of Reinhold Messner, a 1999 album coincidentally sharing its name with Messner, but not named after him, released by Ben Folds 5. See also, List of climbers, references. Selected bibliography, Messner, Reinhold. Free Spirit, A Climber's Life. Seattle, Washington, USA, Mountaineers Books. ISBN A0-89886-573-5, Messner, Reinhold. The Crystal Horizon, Everest, the First Solo Ascent. Seattle, Washington, USA, Mountaineers Books. ISBN A0-89886-574-3, Messner, Reinhold. All 14 8000ers. Seattle, Washington, USA, Mountaineers Books. ISBN A0-89886-660-Messner, Reinhold. My Quest for the Yeti, Confronting the Himalayas' Deepest Mystery. New York, New York, USA, St. Martin's Press. ISBN A978-0-312-20394-8, Messner, Reinhold. The Big Walls, From the North Face of the Eiger to the South Face of Dhaulagiri. Seattle, Washington, USA, Mountaineers Books. ISBN A0-89886-844-0, Messner, Reinhold. Trans. By Tim Carruthers. The Second Death of George Mallory, The Enigma and Spirit of Mount Everest. New York, New York, USA, St. Martin's Griffin. ISBN A0-312-27075-5, Messner, Reinhold. The Naked Mountain, Seattle, Washington, USA, Mountaineers Books. ISBN A0-89886-959-5. Publications in German. Sources: Wetzler, Brad. Reinhold Don't Care What You Think. Outside Magazine, Krakauer, John. Into Thin Air. United States of America, Random House, 1996. External links: Official site, Discovery of Remains ends controversy about the death of Reinhold Messner's brother, Messner Mountain Museum website, Messner, 2002, rare English interview with Messner, on YouTube. 1. Portrait painting of active Messner, interviews, Gaia Symphony documentary series.